3 of 31 with Elliotte Friedman, brought to you by the all-new GMC Terrain. We are professional grade. And as we know, Barry Trotz, he stepped down as the head coach of the Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals, as we're joined by Elliot from Vegas as he gets ready for the NHL awards on Wednesday. And Elliot, how surprised are you that Barry Trotz is no longer the head coach of Washington?
You know, I'm surprised because I thought it would work out. If you heard all of the comments in the aftermath of the Stanley Cup, where Barry Trotz and Brian McClellan said all the right things, I thought it was going to happen. But when I heard that there was something in his contract, as the tweet just says, that there was a 2-year extension that came on if he won the Stanley Cup in Washington, and that number of the amount in that contract was less than what the market now goes for, I wasn't as surprised. There was some chatter in the last 24 hours that they weren't going to be able to make a deal. And like I said, if you asked me a week ago, Caroline, I would say I was very surprised. If you asked me about the 24 hours, I was a lot less surprised.
So where does Barry Trotz go, Fridge? What happens next?
Well, you know, Sid, I mean, we're all sitting here waiting for John Tavares to make a decision. But if you're the New York Islanders and you're trying to convince John Tavares to sign a long-term extension with you, I don't know if there's a better way you could do it than say, look, we're going to bring in the guy who just won the Stanley Cup champion as a head coach. I don't know if I was the Islanders, I would be jumping all over this thing about the possibility of it if they haven't already. So I think that's the number one thing. You know, he could become a broadcaster for a year. He could take some time off. I think there's also the possibility that some teams that already have a coach might say, look, do we want to upgrade with this particular guy, or do we see him as an upgrade? I think there's a little bit of that going on too. But if you're asking me to put down a wager, since I'm here in a sports book, I would probably bet on the New York Islanders.
Well, Fridge, we were kicking around the idea, though, what you just kind of touched on. Let's say it bleeds into next year, and you're a coach on the hot seat. Is there a hotter seat to be on than when you have a situation where a guy with a cup months earlier is just sitting there waiting for his next gig?
No, absolutely true. I mean, he'll be able to pick the shot. Like, I think the only thing that you look at here, Sid, is there going to be any issue is the fact that, you know, Trotz very clearly has a number he's looking at. And, you know, Brian McClellan, the GM of the Capitals, just had a media conference, and, you know, he said that term may have been as much the issue. If they were going to extend Barry Trotz to get him in, like Claude Julien signed, for example, for 5 years and $25 million. If you're going to make that commitment for the Washington Capitals for Barry Trotz, that means you're assuming that Barry Trotz is going to last as your coach for 9 years. You know, who lasts that long? And, you know, I kind of look at it like the Capitals were as much concerned about the term extending for that as they were about the money. I think there was also a group of people in the Capitals organization. I don't think it's McClellan. I think it's above him, the owner, Ted Leonsis, and the president, Dick Patrick, who felt that Barry Trotz signed a deal and he should have to live up to that deal. But at the end of the day, it wasn't going to work. And I think it's just best all parties shake hands, say job well done, and they move on.
From the Washington perspective, it hasn't even been 2 weeks since they hoisted the Stanley Cup. And McClellan, he just took to the podium, and we're going to try and get some of that sound and some of his reaction today in just a bit. But he was emotional. Yeah. So from the Washington perspective, what does this do to them, not just externally, but internally?
Well, you know, I think there'll be some disappointment. I mean, you know, when you win a Stanley Cup, you do it together. But I think, Caroline, the overwhelming candidate, the guy who I think its job is his to lose, was on that bench too, and that's Todd Reirden, the assistant coach. And you know, he was well known for dealing with the defense, and you know, those defensemen really liked him. As a matter of fact, Michael Kempney, who was traded there from Chicago, he said at the end of the season that Todd Reirden basically saved his career. So he's a guy who's got a lot of respect there. He's going to get a face-to-face interview with McClellan. As long as nothing goes weird there, I think that they're going to keep him as the head coach, and that's probably as easy a transition as you can ask for.
Coming up, Fried, we're going to talk to Eric Engels about the Galchenyuk deal from Friday night. Before we let you go, I'm just curious. What was your initial reaction to that move?
You know, I was surprised a little bit, simply because I really thought Pittsburgh was going to get domed. And I'll tell you something too. I think Pittsburgh liked Galchenyuk a lot, so I think they were a team that was looking at both those guys. But I really thought Pittsburgh was going to get Domi. You know, I was more actually surprised about that trade in a way than I was about the Trotz move, just because I thought at the end of the season Galchenyuk finished reasonably well in Montreal, and I thought they would want to keep him and see him how he would do for another year. You know, I think both these guys are going to have a lot to prove, Sid, and I think both those guys want to show that they can be a lot better than they were last year. I think that one's going to be really interesting to see which of those players performs better on their new team, because I think they would both agree that they've underachieved a bit in their careers.
Fried, stop me if you've heard this before. Enjoy Vegas. Because after the Stanley Cup final,
I cannot come here enough.
Yes. The NHL Awards, there you go. Wednesday live right here on Sportsnet. Thanks, Fried. Nice job today.
My pleasure, guys.
Elliotte Friedman, Hockey Night in Canada, breaking the story initially that Barry Trotz was leaving the Washington Capitals 11 days after winning a Stanley Cup